Grandmama used to pray, oh Lord, please save them from the evil snares and all the dangers that entangle. Yea, though they walking through the valley of the shadows, just prepare and make them fit for every battle. Because I know they bound to come, and I know they bound to fall, but in your bounty, Lord, preserve their beautiful. Right, we still survive and offer grandma's prayers, surrounded by the jungle and the lion's den. Tread light, cause these traps is inconspicuous. They hide right in plain sight, thinking we don't see them when they linger. Look right beneath the surface, then leave a trail of corpses. Crisis, prices, your life a disposable commodity. Like living in this fantasy, conditioned to believe that the system even cares whether selling CDs or walking or driving or reading. Look, they don't even need a reason. It's just you breathing and being black. When it's such a pretty fall, it don't seem like we falling at all, at all. It's just a GMO dream, where things are never really what they seem. Please cue the violins, tell them just to play me something pretty, cause this gritty city got me screaming bloody murder. So they got me screaming. This gritty city got me on some. Look, get your hand up on my pocket. Distraction, so lazy they use the same tactics. Like condom with some trinkets, just don't let them get to thinking. That light bulb gets a blinking. You know niggas and ideas. Oh dear, my dear, you may not know me, but I know you very well. Foresight, they say hindsight is 2020. Well, tell me something, we gotta see that history is on repeat. And maybe it takes a beat and a melody to speak a little louder than the message in the clouds or the essence in the air. I swear, my God is just so clear that a system driven by fear can never give us nothing but more of the same things. Oh, when it's such a pretty fall, it don't seem like we falling at all. It's just a GMO dream, where things are never really what they seem. Please cue the violins, tell them just to play me something pretty, cause this gritty city got me screaming. It's murder. Got me screaming, got me. This gritty city got me on some. Ancestor, take my hand. Ancestor, lead me on. Ancestor, let me stand. Ancestor, I get tired. Ancestor, I get weak. God knows I get warm. Ancestor, through the storm. Ancestor, through the night. Ancestor, lead me on. Ancestor, through the light. Ancestor, take my hand. Ancestors, and lead me on. In my way grows drip. Ancestors, please linger near. When my light is almost gone, hear my cry, hear my call. Take my hand, let's not fall. Take my hand, ancestors, and lead me on. Ancestors, and lead me on.
Family was soke, kin legbe oga. I am that which walks with you through the torrential rains of life without getting wet. I am that which walks with you through the firestorm within, yet fire cannot burn me. I am that which walks with you through the winds of transformation, yet cannot be uprooted. I am the memory whose shoulders you stand on when feet plant on earth. I am the head that came before a book. I am the you in that mirror that you look. Say my name. I am ancestor. I am a gungun. Ashe.
Hear my cry, hear my call. Take my hand, dust I fall. Take my hand, ancestors, and lead me on. Ancestor, you a breath, you a bridge. You carry us over tumultuous time. You who can hear and answer with quick remedy, you are ready before we ask. You who can speak through tongues of trees and fire and water, this earth cannot hold you. We pound the ground and you appear, O ancient ones. You who can make lightning strike with the flick of a skirt. You who can make tornado turn with the spin and span of hips, take us there, to the place of knowing, to the hall that leads to the doorway of you, O holy ones. You of the first light, you who know the potential of possibility pulsing in the dark, deliver us unto our gifts. You who have sunlight in your fingertips, oh touch our drums, make us hear the rising, make us move a steady stump, a choir of voices so majestic, heaven hides us in a tapestry of light, oh we are stars, blankets of wonder, sky bright eyes seeing the invisible, visible. You who have returned, you have turned our faces so that we see ourselves, and we have found you again in places we would have never imagined. You make our limits infinitely long, our visions clearer with eyes closed, and even there, you still stand in full color, vibrant and eager to serve. Hear my cry, hear my call, take my hand, lest I fall. Take my hand, ancestors, and lead me on. Lead me on. And lead me on. And lead me on. And lead me on.
Peace, good people. This is Kalonji Changa. I am live and direct. This is RSTV. Um, and we have two of my favorite people be joining me. One's going to turn his camera on so we can bring him to the stage. We have a good brother and comrade, uh, Dhoruba Bin Wahad, who, of course, is no stranger to the platform. In fact, he has a show on the platform, and the show is called the show is called Beggars on Horseback. And we also have broadcasting from the planet of Brooklyn, you know, Operation Power Zone, Charles Barron. Dhoruba, turn your camera on so we can bring folks to the stage.
I could let me turn it on after we do this introduction because I'm low on data here, and
Cool in the game. Cool. So we're gonna do this quick intro, as Dhoruba alluded to, and we will be on in a second. Stand tuned. Stand by.
America we remember. We remember the same reign of deadly terror, justified by the same slogans, motivated by the same wicked ideas. We remember the Weather Underground, which bombed the Pentagon, which bombed the State Department, and bombed the Capitol. We remember the Black Liberation Army, which staged armed robberies and executed police officers at point-blank range. We remember the Symbionese Liberation Army, which shot a public school superintendent to death with cyanide-packed hollow point bullets. In one 18-month period between 1971 and 1972, the FBI counted some 2,500 bombings on American soil, a rate of nearly 5 a day. The overwhelming share of that violence came from left-wing extremists. Between 1970 and 1980, 93% of terrorist attacks in the West came from the far extremist left. These are numbers that would shock most Americans because we've been taught to believe that this kind of political violence, it simply doesn't exist, or it's being exaggerated. But it does exist, and we're actually underestimating it. And our nations bear the scars to prove it.
What's happening, good brothers? As you can see, Marco Rubio was doing his sap rap. You know, something we heard a few weeks back. And we want to kind of, amongst other things, address that. On the screen before we got started, of course, you heard our Sonny Patterson crooning, shout out to her with the song Ancestors. But we actually showed a few of our ancestors, folks like Sekou Odinga, Bilal Sunni Ali, Mark Essex, Twyman Myers, and I may be forgetting some, but one of the things that I wanted to do today, Dhoruba has a series he's been doing called The Soldier Story. And so, you know, as part of the whole, part of Black August, you know, we talk about political prisoners. And so we wanted to pay homage to our ancestors. And so what I would like to do before we address Marco Rubio, Dhoruba, if we could just say a few words for some of our fallen soldiers, past and future. And so I want to start off because of the fact that people, can you hear me pretty good?
Go ahead.
Cool. People have heard names like Twyman Myers. They've heard names like Sekou. Of course, Sekou's been on the platform, Shasha Brown, etc. So can you, and Blood McCreary and others, can you say a little something about who these brothers were and who they are to you?
First of all, Kalonji, I want to thank you and Black Power Media for even taking the time out to talk about Black Liberation Army and the tradition that it represents. I think what a lot of folks don't understand is that the BLA represents a radical tradition of the African community to resist white supremacist violence and legal and extra-legal violence. That this is what the BLA stood for. That the best defense for Black people in America is a good offense. And we understood then, as we understood today, that we are in the midst of a war that is expanding in Western Asia, that the best way that we could achieve our liberation and our freedom is to create a democratic distribution of the pain. That white folks, white supremacy, does not understand anything other but equality of pain. And that they have to understand, we have to make them understand, that it's very, very necessary to leave us alone because it's more expensive, it's more costly, and it will cost you much more to leave us to leave us alone, to mess with us than to leave us alone. And that's basically the dynamic or the dialectic that we're talking about when we're talking about on this day in Black August in 2026, that we're going to attempt to address the stealth history that wrote out the radical legacy of the Black Liberation Army. And I just want to say also, too, that I'm going to read some passages to the audience before we get into a back and forth. I want to also shout out to my comrade and longtime struggle activist, Charles Barron, and who for many years was the only legitimate elected representative that Black folks had in the New York City Council, if not in the country, and who consistently talked about white supremacy, who consistently belabored the Black community to understand that we were a domestic colony and that imperialism abroad, Zionism abroad, affected our everyday life in the Black community. So I just want to shout out and greet my friend Charles Barron. Yeah. Having said that, I just want to put things in context here for a minute. You know, at a press conference in May 2013, the Federal Bureau of Investigation announced that it was designating Assata Shakur as one of its top 10 most wanted terrorists. Assata escaped from the New Jersey jail in 1979 and thereafter surfaced in Cuba, where she was granted political asylum. This designation and the media hoopla surrounding it has significant historical and political implications. While numerous progressive individuals and organizations correctly denounced that designation, recognizing that it was part of an attack on Cuba, far too many progressive and civil rights advocates have missed the greater and more pernicious historical revisionism and the racist political implications behind assigning Assata Shakur as a terrorist. So when Assata was designated as a terrorist, notably missing from this designation were attempts to place Assata's case and the terrorist designation in a political and cultural context of the Black liberation movement in the United States. We just heard that piece of dog doo-doo, Rubio, talk about how left-wing terrorism in America, you understand, had to be, was the most cogent threat to stability and law and order and the American way of life. But we do know that right-wing terrorism, right-wing white supremacy has killed more people, has demeaned and murdered more African Americans than anything that could be attributed to the left. We remember the murder of African people, supremacist racists. We remember the blowing up of federal office building by Timothy McVeigh, another right-wing racist. We remember the murder of Martin Luther King, another nation of white supremacist terrorism. So by focusing on the left, what we're experiencing now, while the U.S. is in the process of losing a war in Western Asia, is an outlet, a means of distracting the American people from who the real terrorists are and supporting the U.S. government's future and ongoing repression of Black people in the Black liberation movement today. So we can expect that many of us, some maybe on this very broadcast, will be targeted and will be harassed by racist white American law enforcement as a way to distract the American people from the fact that they are suffering under administration that is racist, that is white supremacist, that is intent on re-imprisoning Black folks into the system of global capitalism and white supremacy. So I just wanted to say that to begin with, and I just want to say also too that the FBI in 1971, only barely a year and a half before, they would terminate COINTELPRO and launch an operation called New Kill, new killing of police officers, that they had said, and this is a quote, they said, it appears that Huey P. Newton, chairman, one of the founders of the Black Panther Party, that responds violently to any question of his actions or policies or reluctance to do his bidding. He obviously responds hastily without getting all the facts or consulting with others. The Bureau feels that this near hysterical reaction by the egotistical Newton is triggered by any criticism of his activities, policies, or leadership qualities. And some of this criticism undoubtedly is a result of our counterintelligence projects now in operation. This present chaotic situation within the BPP must be exploited, and its recipients must maintain present high level of counterintelligence activity. This is the basis, or this was at the point when the Black Panther Party in 1971 split and went to the right. Went to the right under Huey P. Newton and respected asset agent Wayne Brown. It went to the right under David Hilliard. It went to the right at that particular moment in time, and the FBI made the decision when they defined this split in the Black Panther Party to go after the faction of the Black Panther Party that still embraced the notion and the idea of armed resistance to white supremacy. And that part of the party became known as the Black Liberation Army. So most of the original soldiers of the BLA foundational formation, today they have transitioned. Asada, Sekou Dinga, Curtis Mullins, Thomas Bud McCreary, Albert Noah Washington, Oscar Washington, Harold Russell, Shasha Brown, and many others. They died in relative obscurity, some without even a headstone to mark their grave. Albert Noah Washington, Teddy Jah Heath, Bashir Hamid, and Abdul Majid died in prison after serving decades locked down. So many of those who were arrested from the BPP and the BLA members that are still in jail were related to or came out of Black Liberation Army and not the BPP. So we need to understand that only two individuals from that particular period of time, only two, myself and Geronimo Pratt, able to secure our reversal and our convictions and freedom and secure freedom from prison because of the fact that we were in prison as a consequence of COINTELPRO targeting. The documents in the government's possession proved that both Geronimo Pratt and myself were innocent of the charges that were leveled against us, that we were framed. That's very important to understand, because all of the time we petitioned to get our political prisoners out of jail, not one of them were released because the government had to admit that they were framed. All of them were released as a consequence of pressure, talking about they were innocent, that they were victims, and all of these things. And most of those brothers that were released from prison, with the exception of Leo Mutakim, most of them died within weeks after their release. So we need to understand where we are at today. So when we call for community control of police, we are calling for community control of police because we realize that the police in our community should be of our community and from our community and dedicated to protecting our community. But at the same time, we understand when little children, when Black children are murdered in Walmart and shot in the head with unarmed Black people and shot in the head at traffic stops. When we find Black babies murdered by white supremacist mobs, when we see Black women hanging in the trees in the backyard, that there is no response to this other than to call out Crump and Sharpton and seek justice in the courts. And the Black Liberation Army said that we should not mourn, we should get even. And that we have to understand that only when we exert a consequence on the white supremacist racist violence that's instigated and visited on the Black community will they come to heal. Will they begin to understand that there has to be funerals of that? Funerals on both sides benefit neither. So I just want to leave it at that right there. And we can get into the details about some of our comrades, such as Twyman Myers, such as Blood McCreary, and these comrades who have been forgotten. We don't hear their names. Like we hear the name of George Jackson, or we hear the names of our icons of the Black Panther Party. We don't hear their names because they didn't just stand for self-defense. They didn't just stand for our right to defend ourselves. They stood for our right as a people, as a sovereign, and the right to determine our own destiny. And so self-defense for the Black Liberation Army meant that we had to have a good army.
Man, listen, I'm sitting here, and I think that my brother Charles can agree that for me it sends chills, and I'm saying that because of the fact that it is a spiritual thing, and I think that with what you're saying, that the listeners, the viewers, they must understand that when we talk about Black August and we talk about the prison movement, it's hand in hand with what went on in the streets, right?
That's right.
When we talk about the Black Liberation Army, the same concept of the Black Liberation Army on the West Coast with George Jackson and his crew was the Black Guerrilla Family, right? And these are, when we talk about blood in my eye, Soledad letters, Soledad brothers, this is what is taking place. Would you like to add on to what Dhoruba was saying, Brother Charles, before we get into
Well, first of all, it's always to me an honor to be in your presence, Brother Dhoruba. We joke and play around a lot and talk stuff, but I am so honored to be in your presence, honored to hear your words. Not only have you earned the right to say it, more than most, and not only have you paid dues, you pay dues for others as well. So my respect, love, and appreciation for you is eternal. Secondly, I'd like to say, I think it was Ho Chi Minh who said, when the prison doors are open, the real dragon will fly out. And I know in Vietnamese culture, the dragon was powerful, and the dragon was about protection, protecting our people. So as we move ever so swiftly in the 21st century, I believe there's two things that we must have. One is an independent Black revolutionary political movement. And secondly, an independent Black revolutionary army. There are no changes that can have ever occurred without bloodshed. Even Martin Luther King, who talked about nonviolence, the only thing nonviolent about the civil rights movement was his philosophy. It certainly wasn't a nonviolent movement at all. People died, people bled, people were hung, and not to change the system radically, but to get the right to vote. You know, people didn't really die for the right to vote. They died for the right to be free. And they just connected voting might be one of the ways, or they died the right to be respected as human beings, so that it made it appear that they was fighting for integration and sitting next to white folks. No, they were trying to say, hey, we are human beings. We're gonna die fighting to be free. And with that came the vote that they take back. With that comes integration, which is no longer exists. So when I think about, I was living on the Lower East Side of Manhattan in the Lillian Wall projects, and Mark Holder and Tony Martin used to always come down to the projects, and we would argue and fuss. I was doing community organizing, and they said, come up to Harlem and see what the Panthers are doing. And I said, nah, y'all just about a bunch of rhetoric and, revolutionary rhetoric. So I came up one time, and I'll never forget, Dhoruba, was it on 123rd or 4th Street and 7th Avenue, the office?
Yeah, it was 123rd.
123rd. So when I came, the first person I saw was Seth Weil, Michael Tabor. He had a baritone voice, elongated neck, Adam's apple, and he greeted us. I brought 3 of my friends up there. And so we started to do some political education classes. And I thought, they was going to bust out, weapons and show us how to handle that. But it was books. And they said, here is your first weapon. And then, you learn other things. But from that, we went back down on the Lower East Side just to sell our papers. We never joined the Harlem branch. I lived on the Lower East Side. I said that to say it was at a time where Panthers were being killed left and right. 30, 40 Panthers are killed, thousands are jailed. Nobody got busted for killing a Panther. But yet, when it came to us launching an offensive defense, and one person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter, depending upon how you are defining things. So when I do work with people like Dhoruba, and I had a blessing to be very close to Matulu Shakur and very close with Herman Bell and Seth Hayes, and doing work with Jalil and all of them, working on things to get them out. But as we move now, and as Dhoruba mentioned, they're hanging us. And that more people died at the hands of NYPD. I'm not talking about revolutionaries. I'm talking about ordinary citizens. And most of the cases that we take on, George Floyd or whoever, they weren't revolutionaries. They were just ordinary citizens, that got their lives snuffed out by NYPD and police across the country. So they got angry at me one time because after the Sean Bell killing, 41 bullets with Amadou Diallo wasn't enough. We demonstrated, and then they had to do 50 bullets for Sean Bell. And this man was just at a bachelor's party, trying to be a father to his children and a husband to his wife. And at a bachelor's party, he leaves and they 50 bullets. And the white officer shot 36 of the 50 bullets and killed. So, and this rhetoric, you can't even do rhetoric without them saying you're whatever. All I said was, they said, Mr. Barron, what are you going to tell your people, the peaceful protest? I said, hell no. We're not the only ones that could bleed. We're not the only ones that can go to funerals. They put it all over the papers. Councilman Barron is calling for whatever. And then they, got me on some programs and thought I was going to back up. Did you say that we're not the only ones that can? I said, you're damn right. You're damn right. Y'all got blood that you don't want to lose. Y'all have people's lives. So when we say that, it's not like we like just talking something to be talking. We are tired of dying. And I don't care what we say. Our people are not going to continue to die without doing something. But I'd rather not see a spontaneous rebellion than a more organized effort to protect ourselves, as Malcolm said, by any means necessary. And we need to be able to say that. My brother had written a novel called Black Rising. It's really incredible. He's talking about revolution. He said, you know what? In his novel, I said, all right, they scared of the Black Liberation Army. Let's get security companies. Let's get a bunch of security firms across the nation. And securities are licensed, even in New York, you're licensed to carry if you're in a security firm. But we gotta do something. And I agree with Dhoruba. They will pay attention, like the Deacons of Defense. The Klan paid attention when they realized they were going to lose their lives as well. And then we're not going to be the only ones that bleed. So as we see hangings, what do you say about a hanging? What, never again?
Like black folks hang themselves.
It's like suicide, like every time they kill us. And then the last piece, and I'll stop. We just passed the date of the nuclear bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. How the hell does any government have the moral authority to say anything to anybody domestically about violence or the imperialist wars? They done killed at the drop of the bombing in Hiroshima 70,000, and at the drop of the bombing in Nagasaki 40,000, and then a year after that, the effects of those bombs, you're talking about a couple of 100,000 people. And before that, they bombed Tokyo. So they've been killing people all over the world. They've been killing us here domestically And this Rubio got the nerve to talk about the PLA and these countries. So, you know, I think inevitably, and I know inevitability is not something that's just going to happen, but inevitably, they're going to pay their price because people are not going to continue to take this. I just don't want it to be all spontaneous and we lose more than what we need to.
I want to point out, and I appreciate that from both of you. And again, you know, just the fact that over 300,000 people ended up losing their lives between Nagasaki, Hiroshima, not to include, because of the fact that when we talk about these bombings, you know, we talk about it as if it was just against the military. There were elders, there was elderly women, there was babies, there was animals, there was plants. You know what I'm saying? You talking about an attempt to destroy the planet. I want to point out today, because we're talking about revolution, on this date in Haiti, August 14th, 1791, roughly 200 enslaved representatives from various local plantations got together and they took an oath and they sealed a collective vow to overthrow the brutal system of slavery in what was a French colony at that time. And of course, a week later, August 21st, 1791, they had a massive coordinated slave rebellion, which erupted, and they set plantations ablaze. And you know, they was, as Fannie Lou Hamer would say, sick and tired of being sick and tired. So I want to recognize that today is absolutely a revolutionary day. It's the day that Haitians, you know, got together and decided that, like you all are saying right now, if there's going to be funerals, there has to be funerals on both sides. I want to, you mentioned a couple things you brothers mentioned. One in particular, you talked about the hangings, the lynchings. And we know that all over the country, not just the sister Tasia Fortune, who was found hang in Mississippi. There's so many cases across the country. They had a press conference, which I found out about late, because you know they don't want to invite Black Power media to too many conferences. They had a press conference here in Atlanta yesterday. And who did they have? They had Al Sharpton. They had Ben Crump. They had Hakeem Jeffries and a number of other different folks. They also had the sister Jordan Davis's mother, who was killed in Florida. He was shot in the car. His mother is a congresswoman out here right now, Lucy Braff. But they had all of these people, particularly the three criminals that I named, the Hakeem Jeffries, the Sharptons, and Ben Crump. You all coming out of New York, where Sharpton and Jeffries, of course, we all know his uncle. You know, shout out to Baba Leonard Jeffries, who's been on the platform himself. And we don't even know how they're in the same family. They're like the drunk uncles and whatnot, as far as the Jeffries, Hakeem. I want to know your thoughts on this, because of the fact that how do we go from the BLA to this Groundhog Day of sort, where every day is Negro leadership, where every day, I mean, I'm talking about, they got in there talking about Nolan Wells. Nolan Wells was scheduled to be 19 on this coming Wednesday. On the 19th of August, he would have been 19 years old. They've had his family on tour. They've been using him as a tool. The fact that on the 250-year anniversary of this particular country was the day that he was murdered, and there's still no justice. And what are these Negroes calling for? They're calling for a national day of prayer. While these crackers are praying on us, they're calling for a national day of prayer. I need some commentary on that. What's your thoughts?
Well, let me just jump in on that real quick. I'll let Charles talk about the legal ramifications and electoral stuff that we can do. First of all, Sharpton used to be an ambulance chaser in New York. People that know Sharpton's history know that Al Sharpton is one of the most corrupt pork chop preachers that Black folks have ever produced. And he has come up with a system, with a mechanism of leadership by victimhood. This is why he used to chase the ambulance of killings and of black folks. And at that time, he had a Jewish lawyer, a Zionist lawyer. I forgot his name. But he used to, Rubenstein.
Sanford Rubenstein.
Yeah. And that he played the role that Trump plays now.
Right.
So back then, Sharpton would go to the family. He would donate some money to do the funeral because most victims of police murder, they're poor. They have no money. They can't even afford the funeral. And this tragedy of having their loved ones murdered came straight out of the blue. They're not political. They weren't activists. So Sharpton would come along. He would come along, pay for the funeral, do the sermon, and Rubenstein would then go to the court and make a whole lot of brouhaha. And he's never won a case, but he would make such controversy that the federal government would enter. They would file a civil suit, and eventually, out of all of this, would come some type of foundation or grant for the victim, and everybody will keep it moving. And he went from funeral to funeral to funeral. Look at all, you can go Google how many eulogies Al Sharpton did for the murder for the killings of black folks by cops. Most of them by cops. And how many convictions they actually secured. Okay. So we need to understand that the role that opportunists play, everybody that's on the Congressional Black Caucus today comes from a tradition of co-optation and black misleadership. Now you got to remember, there's a genocide going on in Gaza as we speak. For the last 3 years, the people of Gaza and Palestine have been murdered, their children murdered, their homes destroyed. And then you have Negroes that come out and say, well, Palestinians ain't got nothing to do with us. When now we see that all of it is out in the open. The United States Congress is now considering a bill to merge the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, with the United States military. Right. This is no coincidence. And we see the cop cities that are being built in over 50 states, in almost 50 states across the country, is talking about what? Urban guerrilla training, how to contain minorities, how to contain a rebellion and revolution. And who do they get the game plan from? They get it from the IDF and their work that they're doing in suppressing and murdering the Palestinians. Right. Killing the Palestinian people, murdering the Palestinian people has everything to do with us. So this is why in the minds of the Rubios, they compare the idea and the notion of the BLA with their version and vision of Hamas. You see, they're saying the Palestinians have no right to resist decolonization and genocide. And we're saying the same thing, that we have a right to resist the murder and killing of African people. Now we can march, that's okay. We could protest in the court, that's okay. But those cops to get off, those people who kill our people, they need to pay a price. And they need to pay a price for that so that they would understand that there's going to be a democratic distribution of this pain if there's going to be a real democracy here. The United States only got out of Vietnam when body bags started coming home in disproportionate formations. The only reason that Trump calls a pause in the war, in the aggression and war against Iran, not only because he ran out of sophisticated missiles, but because it's costing them more than to leave them the fuck alone. Okay, you have an $89 billion aircraft carrier that was built to project American power abroad, and the sailors on the ship are fighting and killing each other and trying to jump off the ship. The toilets don't work on the ship. Okay, $89 billion the United States spent on this piece of crap floating around the world, and they can't afford education system. We can't afford free health care. We can't afford to rebuild our infrastructures in our community. But we could build an $89,000 aircraft carrier.
Million. Right.
I guess what I said had some type of effect.
No, you good. You froze for a second. You good.
Well, let me just say this about Sharpton. Let me say this quickly about Sharpton.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, first of all, I was Reverend Herbert Daughtry's chief of staff, and we had the National Black United Front. Originally, when families were victims of this violence, I had to hurry up and get to the family before Sharpton and Roy Ennis. Remember Roy Ennis? Roy Ennis. So I had
I remember they had a
Yes.
fight on TV.
right. So I said, let me hurry up and get to this family, because the bottom line is the media is not after Sharpton originally. They wasn't after Sharpton or anybody else. They want that crying mother. They want that family. So whoever gets the family, they have the issue, and they have the issue two ways: by way of the media and by way of the civil suit. Now these lawyers get a third of whatever settlement comes with the civil suit. So when you see Ben Crump and all of them on there, that's because they know
You're breaking up. You're breaking.
I'm breaking up still.
I think it's you. It's you,
I
Dhoruba.
don't know if you broke up for everybody, but
Oh, I think I'm good.
Yeah, it's
Yep,
Dhoruba that's broken up.
Oh, you're breaking up, Dhoruba. In any event, they would get a third of
okay.
everything.
Let me.
The real lawyer that should have gotten all that money was Alton Maddox. Alton Maddox did a lot of the pro bono cases, but as soon as Sharpton got a case, he gave it to Rubenstein. So that was my first initial thing. Then the Black United Front wanted to unite with everybody, including Sharpton and everybody else. So then I had to play the role. I had to deal with Sharpton and be at the same rallies and some of the same meetings. After doing that for a minute, then I pulled away even from the front and Dodge, I just couldn't do that anymore. It's painful to have to do that. So now when you see them there, they're trying to get the civil suit, because the first thing you got to do is get the state to indict on the state level for criminal charges. And then when you can't get that, you get the feds to indict on civil rights violations, your right to move about freely in your neighborhood. And that gives you that's what happened in the Rodney King case. They didn't get it on the state level, but they got it on the federal level. And then there's the civil suit. Money. They ain't got nothing to do with nobody going to jail for anything. So that's the first thing. Then Hakeem Jeffries. Hakeem Jeffries comes from Wall Street firms. He has no history in our movement. He was a little black studies, the black leader on the little college campus with the Black Student Union. But he comes out of Wall Street. So he ran 2 or 3 times for the assembly and lost until he finally won. When
with APAC money.
Yeah, that's right. Now, when I was in the city council, I decided to run for Congress against Ed Towns. And we shocked them by getting like almost 30-40% of the vote. And he was shocked. We were real close, like a couple thousand votes. So when it came again, Hakeem was running against Ed Towns. And I said, wow, I got 15,000 votes last time. If I get in that race, they'll split the Jewish vote, they'll split the machine vote, and I could bring my 15,000 down the middle and win. They all knew that. So what they did, they knew that I would beat both of them if they both stayed in. Towns dropped out. And so it was me against Hakeem. 23 unions that I supported and supported me jumped to Hakeem. Obama, Nancy Pelosi, this was the most powerful assemblage to stop one Black Panther politician in Brooklyn in the history of our state. That's how he got in. And he is Wall Street, and he is the AIPAC. He is an AIPAC Wall Street puppet. And you know what? Nancy Pelosi orchestrated him getting that top seat, because it should have gone to Barbara Lee, who had a history of with the Panthers with Ron Dellums. She was there for 25, 30 years. She was getting that top seat. Nancy couldn't control her. So she, after 10 years, she gives it to Hakeem. She got the votes for him because he's a sellout Negro. And our biggest challenge now is the neo-colonial Black puppets of the Democratic Party.
I want to ask you.
Go ahead. No, I think that what Charles was pointing out, he was pointing out the machinations that the system went through, the Democratic Party went through in order to stop a revolutionary or even a radical voice from being in Congress, a black radical voice.
That's right.
And we have to understand that every one of these individuals in the Congressional Black Caucus today have been silent on the genocide that's going on in Gaza. They're silent on the targeting of migrants in the United States. They're silent on the U.S. wars of aggression in the Western Asia. They're silent. And these same people came out of the tradition of anti-poverty pimps the LBJ's War on Poverty created. That's where the black capitalists, the advocates talking about, oh, stop talking about white folks killing black people. Black people are killing black people. It's black on black crime.
Right,
okay.
Right.
So to detract and move away from dealing with the reality that African people are subjected in the United States to a domestic system of colonization and police violence. And that fascism is nothing new to the black community, but now it's being imposed on the white majority population. And now they're talking about how the country is headed towards a second civil war. Well, if the country is headed towards a second civil war, the black community should arm themselves before they harm themselves.
Hey.
And if they had a second civil war, we need to let them understand if you come in the black community talking that yik-yak shit, you're gonna get your ass handed to you. And we need to have that type of formation. All the community labor that goes into supporting a resistance against white supremacy is extractive labor. Because the BLA didn't exist on its own because there were guys running around with guns or Sada was out there running around sticking up banks. No, the BLA existed because ordinary people in the black community knew us when we were in the Black Panther Party feeding children. They knew us when we was in the black community doing health programs. They knew who we were, what we stood for, and they supported us. They gave their apartments to us so that we could have safe houses. They transported us so that we could move around the country. And the black community needs to understand the same principle that underwrote the Underground Railroad during the days of slavery was that ordinary people and working people donated from where they were to support that underground. And we need that to turn to the spirit of African resistance today.
And people need to understand also that Martin Luther King said he felt safest when he was in the home of the preachers that were armed, that had guns. And when they blew up his house and almost killed his family, Coretta had to stop him from getting, some paperwork to get a weapon. So, when people think of violence, we can't just be the victims of it. Then we got to defend ourselves by any means necessary. We were going to ask something, Kalonji?
Yeah. So I wanted to and thank both of y'all for that, because I think that oftentimes, we talk about our losses, and that's why, it was strategic to bring you two on. I want to earlier you mentioned Twyman Dhoruba. So I want to kind of backtrack, rewind a little bit, and let's talk about who Twyman Myers was, and also some of these other soldiers, because of the fact that, again, their names may be mentioned in passing, but for the most part, most Africans that we know have never even heard the names even mentioned. And so I know Twyman was a young man, so if you don't mind speaking on who Twyman Myers was, and then we can kind of move from there.
Well, when the split in the Black Panther Party occurred and came to a head was in May of 1971. And well, actually, it was as I read the FBI document to you, you could see that the FBI was congratulating themselves for having moved the leadership of the Black Panther Party to the right and away from self-defense. And the party would go on the West Coast to engage in local political activities, run for political office, et cetera, et cetera. So the FBI focused on what they call the Cleaver faction, the left faction, the radical faction of the Black Panther Party that did not give up the gun. as a means of self-defense. And that was on the East Coast and in the Southeast and in the Midwest, in Chicago, New York, Philadelphia, and places like that. Now, so at the time that it happened in May of 1971, the Black Panther Party had called 2 years earlier for a united front against fascism, and called for a rally to rally the left, to form a united front against fascism, because fascism was beginning to raise its ugly head. What we see today, the type of politics we see today, where neoconservatives and neoliberals talk about their white supremacy out loud in your face. Back then, they didn't do it. There was an extreme right wing that the conservative, Republican, and Democrats had, that they could say, well, those are extremist views. You know, we are about this, and we are about integration. We are about everybody being treated equal and all of that. But today, DEI is outlawed. The history of slavery is being written. The white supremacists are taking redistricting straight away. They just say it straight up. We don't want no niggas to have no power. And they're redistricting in Texas and in Mississippi, Louisiana. They're writing out black electoral districts, which means that without a black political party, which Charles Barron alluded to, the attempt to form a black political party, a black-led third party, has always been undermined and subverted by individuals like Sharpton, by individuals like Jesse Jackson, by individuals that are now in the Congressional Black Caucus, okay? And they did this for a reason, to maintain their ability and their power in relationship to white power and white supremacy and capitalist influence. So we need to understand, one, that we do need a third political party. And that when we talk about the Black Liberation Army, the Black Liberation Army didn't say it stood alone. It didn't say that. It said that it was an underground, that it was a movement that exerted a consequence on those people who would murder and kill in our community. And that consequence was part and parcel of a political dynamic. It was part and parcel of a political a matrix that meant that the enemy of black people will suffer a consequence whenever they murdered and killed black folks without being brought to justice. That was the point. So the role that the Sharptons played in all of this, they inserted themselves into this dialectic, into this dynamic, by making the victims of white supremacist murder leaders. So we see in Trayvon Martin, we see in Trayvon Martin, we see in the murders of black folks. We see that whenever Sharpton brings out his entourage in his game, he trots out many of the people that he already represented to show how this is a similarity that's been going on and on and on, and that we need to come together and support these families. And the first thing the families say, because they're not political, and because their hearts are broken, and because they rightly believe in the values of nonviolence, the first thing they say, well, we think everybody should come out and let's just let the courts do their work, and let's protest non-violently, and let's not do anything violent, you see. And we need to understand that, yes, we empathize and we mourn with the loss of your child, and we understand that, but we're not going to be restricted by the limitations of your apolitical development. We're not going to be limited by the fact that you are now a victim of white supremacy. We're saying, nah, the cops that killed you, the people that murdered your child, they need to be brought to account. And if the courts don't bring them to account, we will. Okay.
And let me say something to this about that. You know, you're so right, Dhoruba, because I had met with families who did not want to deal with Sharpton for that very reason, because they saw him as pimping off their blood. And they said to me, like, would you take the case? Because we don't want Sharpton here at all. Matter of fact, when him and Jesse went to Ferguson, they got them brothers said, hey, y'all got to take a walk. So
I was there.
A lot. Right. See, a lot of that was happening. But you know what happens, Dhoruba? After those things blow up, take Ferguson, for instance, you know, when the stuff jumped off, there was one black in the city council. There was like 50 some odd police officers and two blacks. There were hardly any blacks on the school board. So what happens is when the brothers and sisters that rebel and resist and get into spontaneous violence, then when the dust clears, the Negroes put their shirts and ties on. Now they got a bunch of black representation in Ferguson, but it's not us. It's sellout Negroes because they take advantage over it's almost like what Jay-Z is doing. You know, we do a movement, Colin Kaepernick takes a knee, and then Jay-Z goes to the master and say, can we do some music at halftime on the plantation? Because, you know, that people were even boycotting that. Then again, they do a boycott against Target. Now, you know, whatever.
But you know, I think
this real quick. And then he now deals with Target. So whenever the movement creates stuff, and this is the vacuum I'm trying to fill with black radical electoral politics. So when we create that vacuum and they demand something, then revolutionaries can fill that void. And finally, if we want to talk about violence, then let's talk about economic violence. Let's talk about the violence of poverty, the violence of unemployment, you know, the violence of miseducation, and the violence of mass incarceration. See, there's nothing more violent than that, but that's not seen as violence. That's seen as a social condition. Go ahead, Dhoruba.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Charles. And I just wanted to add a dimension to that, because when they saw that leadership by victimhood had its limitations, when Trayvon Martin was killed, after Trayvon Martin was murdered and the piece of shit that killed him walked free, you know, they came up with hashtag movements.
That's right.
Black lives don't matter. Because the people in the streets, they were furious. They were tired of this stuff, Ferguson. And so who did they trot out? They trotted out these so-called black leaders that are supposed to have been old school leaders and reformers, and they came up with the hashtag movement, Black Lives Matter. And we know in the white supremacist construct of America, black lives ain't never mattered. It was always a question of mind over matter. White folks didn't mind and black folks didn't matter. So we need to understand that not only was Sharpton types thrown into the breach with leadership by victimhood, hashtag movements came up to suck up all of the militant energy that was on the streets at that time, when people were tired of being murdered, tired of cops getting off and being free. And they sucked up that with the hashtag Black Lives Movement. Even I had people in Ferguson call me and tell me how so-called Black Lives Matter advocates would come into town, post up in the hotel, and Apple would give them cell phones, and they would have access to press conferences, and the people on the street who were demonstrating didn't even know who these spokesmen were. They had signs, so they would get in the front of the demonstration that says Black Lives Matter. This was all designed to suck up the energy of black militancy. And what happened with these hashtag movements? The mainstream corporate entities gave them grants, gave them money, and the Black Caucus called these two knuckleheads that was leading the Black Lives Movement, called them in, talking about they was just like the Panthers in their era. And they went and did what with the money? They went and bought them a mansion, moved on out, and kept it moving. You see? So what happened to the black?
Ruben, let me warn us on something else. DSA, the Democratic Socialists of America. Now, I know as compared to the neo-colonial black puppets of the corporate Democrats, they look good, no question about it. But also, you got to look at DSA, and you got to look at the funding of nonprofit organizations, where they get their money from. Because if you're in the movement and you're talking about getting hundreds of thousands of dollars from some either white philanthropic or from the system, then we gotta weigh how far is that going and how real is that going to be. So the nonprofit movement, then you got DSA doing a great job because they organize them, but they picking blacks that nobody ever heard of. In New York, these blacks that DS, and I know them and I have a good relationship with them because we were in, elected office together. But soon as they get in, they become politicians. See, their goal is not to change the system, is to move the Democratic Party to the left of center. So now we have this big movement, and they're calling them communists. Trump can't even spell the word. They're so far from being communists that it's a joke. So we got to look out that we don't allow the DSA movement to now take shape in the form, because we so anti-Trump that anybody's anti this right wing. So that's how Hakeem Jeffries and Letitia James and all these sellouts, they look good attacking Trump, as though all of this stuff started with Trump.
Yes,
it was
Trump is
Obama who murdered Muammar Gaddafi along with NATO and Hillary Clinton, and put some odd military bases in Africa, deported more people than Trump. But so we got to look out in this political arena that how we deal with DSA, corporate Democrats, and some of these non-profit organizations that are being funded by white folk.
Yeah, I just want to add to that real quick, because Charles pointed out something very important to understand about the Democratic Party. We need to advise brothers and sisters to go read the origins of democratic socialism and Democrats.
Yes.
Because it was at the height of the rise of fascism in the early 20th century that democratic socialists became the go-between between genuine communists and fascists. And they were the ones that were talking about, fascism, we could deal with it, but it has to involve people having democratic rights and socialist rights, because fascism is the marriage of corporate power and the rich and elite with the state. That's what fascism in essence is. So democratic socialists and socialist Democrats were the reformers of fascism during World War II. The real resistors that resisted the occupation of Europe, that fought the Nazis in Europe, were pure, straight up communists.
That's right.
Okay?
That's
the
right.
partisans were communists.
Right. And remember that, you're so right, Dhoruba, because that's where the New Deal came in with Franklin Delano Roosevelt. When the pure communists were making headway, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, he went to his rich folk, if we're going to save capitalism, then you got to have some unemployment benefits. If we're going to save capitalism, we got to do this. And then as soon as they brought in the so-called New Deal, which was no deal for us, as soon as they brought that in, 10 years later, they had McCarthyism to say everybody was a communist.
And here we are again. Here we are again. McCarthyism 2.0.
You got Trump talking about Muslim communists. I mean, this shows the ahistorical nature of him. Because when
it's like Chinese soul food.
Yeah. Listen, you remember in 1979, that's why I say the African people have to read history. But right now we are in a situation where the United States empire is crumbling, it's coming apart, and it's becoming very desperate and violent. When we look at the history of 1979, when Ayatollah Khomeini flew into Tehran, okay, and millions met him at the airport. The first thing the CIA and the MI6 went to, they went to history books and say, there was always a divide between the Shia and Sunni Muslims. The Arabs were basically Sunni, and the non-Arabs, Persians or Iran was Shia. So they went back to that old historical division between Shia Islam and Sunni Islam, and it paid off. And ultimately they came up with the Abraham Accords.
Right. And check this out. I'm gonna do this real quick. Kalonji, you're getting the ready sign. You're trying to get me and him off. But we'll leave
good.
We look, good. I'm gonna be speaking at the Shrine of the Black Madonna this Sunday at 1 o'clock. And I want them to understand. Well, Martin Luther King said something important. He said, we got to get the language right. But let's just check this out. There's no World War I and World War II. The world was not at war. as Omali Yeshitela says, it was Imperialist War I and Imperialist War II, because those were 6, 7, 8 countries that wanted to deal with imperialism and control the global economy. And England came out on top with the pound being the main thing. Then there's the Civil War. There's no Civil War. First of all, there's nothing civil about it. And, you know, initially, they literally called it the Slaveholders' Rebellion. And then years later, the white right-wing crackers sanitized it by calling it the Civil War. There was no Revolutionary War. That was Slaveholders' Rebellion War I, and Slaveholders' Rebellion War II was the so-called Civil War, because the 13 colonies were rebelling against England because England was getting rid of slavery, not for moral reasons, because it wasn't making profitable sense because of the liberation movements in the Caribbean. And then the Civil War was a rebellion of the slave states, 11 slave states, 11 free states, and 4 of the free states. Look at the emancipation. Those enslaved in the Southern Confederacy, your slaves are free. But the 4 states that stayed, you can keep yours because you didn't what? Rebel against the Union. It was no revolutionary war, and there was no civil war. It was a rebellion, a slaveholders' rebellion.
Real quick, this is Black.
Let me say this. Not one Confederate general or one Confederate leader was executed for rebelling against the United States.
That's right. That's right.
Not one.
Not one.
Not one.
Not one.
I think we need to give our host a play, Dhoruba. Would you like to say something?
Hey, man, listen, man. I know y'all cats from New York. Y'all got this big game going. It's all good. They like, yo, we got him. Anyway, this is Black Power Media. And these 2 brothers right here, for folks who aren't familiar, they both have shows on the platform, by the way. Operation Power with Charles and Inez Barron comes on Thursday. In fact, they just had a show last night.
You got that wrong. It's Inez and Charles Barron. Let's get it right.
Oh, my bad. She around? Okay.
We had to clean up.
You know she must be an earshot. Look.
Hey, Dhoruba, she next to him. I know
the script. I know the script. I know my sister. I know the script. And homeboy had to make sure he got on the record with that so he could go
quick. Hey, if I was talking to him regular.
Your brothers ain't moving me. I ain't afraid of y'all. Yeah, that's right. That's right. I'm on record.
Hey, how you doing, Mama Inez? Anyway, listen. Last night they had a show with Jamal Joseph, Dhoruba's
really
co-defendant. Make sure y'all go back and check that out. That's Operation Power every Thursday, 7 p.m. Also, Dhoruba has a show on here. He ain't been on in a while, but we have some archives to check out for now. Beggars on Horseback is doing really well. Fridays, 10 a.m. But I want to point out something to you all real quick. Because you all mentioned Ferguson, and we talked about how, you know, you had these black Negroes. The then governor of Missouri, Jay Nixon, brought in, I don't know if y'all remember, Captain Ron Johnson. He was a Missouri state highway patrolman. He was the black face, the black officer that they used inside of Ferguson to calm the insurgents.
Oh yeah, he was walking the street with them.
Yeah. So around that time, and we was down there. I got some footage from that as well that I'll probably bring back up. But I remember because this is actually 12 years ago today. I was actually in Ferguson because Mike Brown was killed on the 9th of August. And so I remember we had some commentary, Dhoruba and I may bring that back up. We had a show back then called Contraband Classifieds. And it was we had that, and then I had a show on People's TV here in Atlanta. But I'm bringing that out because of the fact that as the hip hop group, Digital Underground would say with Tupac, all around the world, same song. That was 12 years ago, right? What do you all see? What do you see us at now? And, you know, compared to 12 years ago, has anything changed, or are we going further down the toilet bowl? That's the question I have for you all.
Well, you know, I think that the biggest change is not so much domestically even though we have a lot of young, I know in New York City, there's a lot of young Black radicals, militants coming up and revolutionaries coming up that I'm very pleased with. But I think the real change for our movement is what's happening in the Sahel revolution in Africa. The rise of Mali, the rise of Burkina Faso, and the rise of Niger. And it's having an influence on others like in Chad and Senegal. So we're looking at that, and I think some things might even be happening in Ghana. I'm not sure. Dhoruba knows better than that. But then in addition to that, although this is not a coalition made in heaven, BRICS is on the rise too. And there's a lot of contradictions there. And there's a lot of, groups that are still dealing with American imperialism and American dollar. But between the rise of BRICS and then the rise of the Sahel revolution, and then the implosion of the Democratic Party here and the Republican Party here, they're fighting each other, whether it's DSA versus corporate Democrats or whether it's Marjorie Greene, the one right wing versus Trump and his side. There's an implosion going on because, as Dhoruba said, this is a declining empire. And the dollar is being more devalued now than ever before. This is why Musk is angry at Trump for dealing with Iran and all of this stuff. When the dollar, they bombing places because they're using the yuan, the Chinese currency, and the ruble, the Russian currency, to deal with oil and things, and the dollar's declining. So I think 12 years ago, we didn't have this kind of dynamic. But the challenge is us to have programs like this, Kalonji, that can really bring the propaganda, the proper propaganda to what's going on so that they don't take off with it and take it in a whole nother direction. Dhoruba?
Yeah, well, right here in West Africa, the Ukraine is supplying drones to these various so-called Muslim insurgencies that the United States created. I think a lot of people don't know that the United States created Al-Qaeda, and that the ISIS never chopped no Israeli's head off. They never attacked Israel, and they need to understand that the purpose of creating these groups is to detract and institutionalize the U.S. and European presence in Africa. The UAE is actively training the rapid support force in Sudan that's raping and murdering and killing thousands and thousands of Sudanese as we speak. It's the UAE that's doing that. The Egyptians. It's the Egyptians that are fostering contradictions in eastern and western Somalia. It's these Arab governments that were willing to turn their back on the Palestinian movement, saying that because they claimed that they wanted protection and stuff from the United States. And now these same governments find that having military bases on their soil is not protection at all, that they are a target. And I think that we need to understand what that really, really means, because Gaddafi was murdered and killed by the United States and NATO, and the African Union stayed silent and looked on.
That's right. They
actually looked on in silence. And this was a man that was advocating Pan-African solidarity. He was advocating for African common minerals market, so that the Europeans, if they wanted to buy minerals in Africa, they wouldn't buy it from one state. They would have to buy it on a common market. And they would have to use the afro or whatever the currency would be called. So now they murdered him, and look at Libya. And then they try to say, well, the Libyan overthrow of Libya is the one that allowed all of these movements, these armed movements, to go in to Mali and Niger and Burkina Faso and wreak havoc. So they're not responsible for them. But then we do know that all of these movements, the majority of them, are financed and armed by the French, by the United States and NATO. They're carrying NATO weapons. They're riding NATO motorbikes. This is what they're doing. So we need to understand that at this historical moment that the U.S.'s empire is being challenged by a mid-range mid-range power like Iran, and Iran is winning this war and humiliating them, that the United States is going to pull out every card in their book to undermine African unity. And that means they're going to support and suborn all types of violence and reactionary violence here on the continent. One of the things that we know here in the diaspora is that we are not safe here as members of the African diaspora, because the African Union is financed by the European Union. They underwrite their checks.
Right.
And that comes with receipts. You have to do something for that. And one of the main things that the African Union is engaged in now is trying to walk back reparations to make it look as though reparations is nothing but a claim for fair trade and profit from African mineral resources. We are in a situation now where the United States and the European Unions desperately need Africa, and Africa don't need them. And African leaders like this. And this has an inflection, because some of the Negroes that's over there right now, okay, that came here during Emancipation Day, that came to Africa recently and did a Juneteenth celebration on the African continent with the Ghanaian government. Many of these individuals are individuals that are not genuine Pan-Africans. They're talking about investment opportunities from Africans. They're Black capitalists. Many of them are reactionaries. Right. And so we don't have the type of support. When I say we, I mean the revolutionary Pan-Africans that are here in Africa. We don't have money. We don't have corporate representatives. We're not getting grants for none of these things. We're speaking solely on Pan-African revolutionary principles that Kwame Nkrumah enunciated when Ghana declared its independence in, I believe, 1957, when he said that the liberation and the freedom of Ghana meant nothing without the total liberation and emancipation of the African continent.
And that's what the was trying to continue that same thing. And remember, at the Bandung Conference, all of the Asian and African states came together to throw off the yoke of colonialism. And a couple of years after that, we got Ghana. And then in the 1960s, you remember the Congo, Patrice Lumumba, Sekou Touré, all. Now, see what happened then. And people should understand also that in 1944, with the Bretton Woods Conference in 44, that's when they, right after World War II, or Imperialist War II, they created the IMF and the World Bank and the United Nations in 45. Israel becomes a state in 48. NATO is organized in 49. So all of that's going down. And now they're looking at countries saying, France, get the hell out of Africa, leave the gold behind, and we're gonna deal with Burkina Faso without borrowing anything from the IMF or the World Bank, because we got our own gold that we're keeping. And now 2/3 of the progress that's happening in Burkina Faso is with the money they got from kicking the mining, the Italian mines, the German miners, kicking them out, putting some of them in jail. See, that has never happened before. So this is why, we got to look at what's going on and don't see once little countries like that take on American imperialism and Israel imperialism and colonialism, then everybody flexes and say, wait a minute, I thought they were invincible. I didn't know they can be beaten by a little country like that. So this is what they're afraid of. This is why I was afraid of Dhoruba, because the message that the BLA was saying, you don't have to be scared of these folks. This is why the Deacons of Defense, the message they sent to our people, you don't have to be afraid of them. They can be beaten. I
think the main message, Charles, the main message is for revolutionary resistance movements, we don't have to win every battle. We only have to survive. They have to win every battle, and that's being proven in Iran. And I think you mentioned the Bandung Conference when Africa, the Pan-Arab movement, the communist, it all came together. Third world countries all came together, declared neutrality.
That's
Now
right.
we have another historical moment when all of these same nations in the global South are coming together and form BRICS.
Come on now. There you go. And you know what something's interesting?
This is far more potent than non-alignment.
Exactly. You know what's interesting? China, people say, well, Charles, China and Russia, that's going to be the recolonization economically of Africa. Hell no. First of all, we have to admit this, no matter what you feel about China, what you feel about Russia, we don't have Chinese last names. We are not speaking any Chinese languages because they did not colonize us. We don't have Russian last names. We don't have Russian languages because they didn't colonize us. Dhoruba, most of in the 60s, they were supporting Frelimo in Mozambique. They were supporting the liberation movement, SWAPO in Namibia. They were being supported by Russia and supported by China. I'm not saying there's no country dealing with getting African resources that's totally doing it for the benefit of Africa. They're not doing that. They're doing it for the benefit of their countries because the scarcities of commodity, we used to be a commodity. In some instances, we still are a commodity. But the scarcity of commodities is causing countries to do one or two things: imperialism, colonialism, take it from Africa, or mutually beneficial agreements, trade agreements, like China is working. Y'all need weapons, I need your gold, but it's mutually beneficial because there are some African leaders, not the sellouts in ECOWAS, the Economic Community of West African States, about 15 puppet governments set up by France and America. Not them, but the liberation movements are saying the relationship with Russia and China has to be mutually beneficial.
I want to point out something real quick.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you want to.
I'm saying what Charles is pointing out is we have to understand there's a new generation of military leaders.
Yes.
A young generation of military leaders. Before, when coups were taken, the dude would put on a suit and become a duke for the Europeans. Not so with Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. They're becoming the heroes of a new generation of African people. So all of these old tired ass 80 and 90-year-old African leaders who are still on the American and French tit, they're scared of their own military. They're afraid of their own military.
That's right.
And so what they're doing is they're trying to insulate themselves. France is trying to get back into the Sahel through Chad. So we still have these.
That's right.
That will overthrow or betray the whole idea and the notion of genuine African sovereignty. And finally, I just want to say this too, that with the oil crisis and the rise in oil crisis that's happening in Western Asia, the Europeans in the United States are looking towards West African crude. They're looking towards West African oil. We cannot be interdicted through the Straits of Hormuz, through the Red Sea.
That's right.
You see, so they're dangling all of this money in front of these same Negroes in ECOWAS right now as we speak. Okay, the United States has troops back in Nigeria right now, talking about they're fighting Boko Haram. Okay,
and it's interesting too, Dhoruba, that this is going to be an opportunity for Africa to go solar, for Africa to go geothermal, the powerful energy in the earth, for Africa to go wind turbines. There are other sources of energy that's inexhaustible. The sun will never be exhausted. The sun is always coming out. You got to get the technology. So now a lot of African countries, because they're brilliant minds in Africa, people don't realize that. On technology and all of that stuff, brilliant minds, they're looking at solar, they're looking at hydropower, water, they're looking at wind. When you think water, wind, sun, the earth, come on, versus coal and oil.
That's where the Chinese come in, because the Chinese are heads up in developing that African government, because they know that if Africa is independent, it's going to be the same type of market for them that it would be
You got
that
it,
the
Dhoruba.
colonials had used for themselves.
That's
The
right.
Chinese ain't trying to occupy Africa. They ain't trying to be. They trying to be our next leader. They realize that the global distribution of wealth and resources requires that the global South be empowered, that the global South, that the dollar be dollarized, that there has to be a more eclectic economic order, not a capitalist finance capitalist.
That's right. I'm doing a piece called the birth.
The Chinese are going to be our next colonizers only means that the only way they could do that is if you have a residual absentee colonial mentality and you accept that shit.
That's right. That's right.
I want to real quick jump in. We got about 15 minutes left, and you know, I'm loving the coverage. We're literally going from block to block. You know what I mean? We've gone international. Point out something real quick, just an acknowledgement. Recently, we lost our comrade Johanna Fernandez. We want to, lift her up. But also, this past week, we lost Ward Churchill, and of course, Ward Churchill. Dhoruba, you can, of course, we all know that he's done incredible work around COINTELPRO, counterinsurgency, folks like him, Bob Boyle, and others. I know that a few years ago when we started the National Coalition Against Police Terrorism, we had you, Cynthia McKinney, Ward, and others on board, and he always was there to, support our work and stand by our work, stand by the work we did with Imam Jamil Al-Amin, formerly H. Rap Brown, and also the last thing that I served on him with was the ad hoc committee with for Leonard Peltier. So I just want to acknowledge the fact that Ward Churchill is now an ancestor.
Wow, man. I didn't realize that, man. I met him. Yeah. When did that happen?
A couple days ago, a few days ago.
Ward Churchill's book on COINTELPRO was written because we opened up the 300,000 pages of FBI files that we had secured to Ward, and he wrote that very good piece on COINTELPRO. The people I urged to read on the counterintelligence program. Yes, Ward Churchill was a Native American. Was indigenous from indigenous people, and his whole politics was revolved around indigenous people's history and resistance that went all the way back to Wounded Knee. He was one of the editors and archivists of the Wounded Knee resistance back in the 60s and 70s. So Ward was always a Native indigenous person who supported the liberation of African people, who understood the connections between our struggles and the historical connections. And I just want to say in relationship to that, and the sister Johanna Fernandez, that we've always had brothers and sisters, whether they were from the nationalist movements of Puerto Rico, whether they were Cubans, who've always were in solidarity with African people. Many of the comrades who fled here under persecution like Asada, they found a home in Cuba. So we need to understand that when Rubio and the United States government talks about going after Cuba, it's not because Cuba represents any type of economic or military threat. It's because of the ideology of Cuba, because of the social ideology of Cuba. The Cubans fought on behalf of African people with guns in their hands. They trained doctors in Africa. They trained some of the best doctors in Africa today. Okay,
right.
So their solidarity with the ANC. If you remember Mandela wouldn't say one mumbling bad word against the Cubans because they were there when nobody else was. They supported the ANC. They supported the liberation of Mozambique. They supported the liberation of the MPLA. So the Cubans have always been supporters of African freedom and liberation. And so we need to understand that we should dance when who brought us to the party too. And we need to be supporters of the Cuban people and their revolution. And so, as Charles pointed out, that our comrades in other areas, other so-called ethnic groups. They've been trying to pit us against each other ever since. This is why you have knucklehead Negroes coming up talking about, well, ICE ain't after us. They're just getting them Latinos that came in the country illegally. Nigga, you in the country illegally. So and we got these foundational black Negroes talking about they more Americans, than white folks. Talking about, we shut out. Hey, boy, don't start me on these niggas. So I just want to get back.
What's wrong with your man, Charles? What's wrong with your man, Charles?
That's my.
What's wrong with Dhoruba?
That's my man. You leave him alone.
I just want to get back to BLA, which started us up. We want because I want African people to understand, and I want Black folks in the United States to understand that we are not advocating indiscriminate killing of other human beings. We're not on the same tip as Zionists that are murdering innocent children and women as we speak. We are not on the same tip as the Ukrainians who are trying to become part of NATO on the doorstep of the Russian Federation, because we know goddamn well if the United States didn't want Cuba on their doorstep, the Russians damn sure don't want the Ukraine on their doorstep with nuclear missiles representing NATO. So we need to understand
that in the Congo and the Sudan, our babies are dying.
That's right. We need to, and this is very important because the Iranian resistance to U.S. aggression, to U.S. and Zionist aggression, opposes some of these same enemies that are in Africa. It's the UAE. It's the UAE that is the enemy of African people. It is the Saudi government. The Saudi government that's bankrolling resistance in Ethiopia and in the Sudan. So we need to understand who our enemies are. Sometimes we are good friends with those of us who share the common enemy. That's not to say that the Iranians or anybody else are perfect. That's not to say that you won't find racist Iranians, because I'm quite sure you will. And in fact, I've known a couple. And most of them was from the Mujahideen Khalaq, the so-called Marxist Iranians who are now on the CIA payroll. Everybody comes to light. Anybody that these crackers are slipping money to undercover are enemy of African people, are enemy of Black people, because they have never supported anything that we stood for and never supported anything that we have fought for in terms of our freedom. So we need to be clear who our enemies are.
That's right. And understand this. We are 51.2 million strong in the belly of this beast. Africans, Black people, 51.2 million. We are 1.45 billion on the continent.
That's
and
right.
we deal with another 200-300 million with the Caribbean and Central America. We are the majority in the world. When you look at BRICS, even 56% of the population is in BRICS. There are 8 billion people in the world. There's about 4 or 5 billion in BRICS. G7, you're talking 780,000 people, and you're talking about GDP, that's 30% of the world's GDP, where BRICS is 55% of the world's GDP. That's
and
rising. So
that's right.
They are dying. That's what when we talk about dying empires, not just rhetoric, it's real that they're really dying. However, we're in the belly of the beast. So when that bad boy collapses, we got to come up with something to say.
That's why they're talking about a civil war now. The white folks are talking about a civil war because they're stolen elections and all of these pretexts. So if there's going to be a civil war, if there's going to be a throwdown in America, Africans in the United States need to be able to defend ourselves. We need to be able to control our own resources. We need to be able to control the armed agents of the state that are in our community. They need to come from just where community control of public safety, community control of police, decentralization of police are struggles that we could struggle for on the electoral level, on the civil rights.
And on that electoral level, and I remember my office in New York talking about the same thing. Remember up in the office. But look on the electoral level. Whether you're using the Democratic primary as a strategy or independent politics, we got to win seats. Because we won those seats, Viola Plummer was my chief of staff. Omawale Clay was my chief. We hired revolutionaries that were able to work full-time in the community, get a decent pay, health care, and because we were so successful for so long, 21 years, they got a pension and health care. You know, Dhoruba, ain't no revolutionaries getting no pension and health care.
Tell me about it. I'm about to get cut off now because I ain't got no data.
That's what I'm saying. So I'm saying, can you imagine that was, instead of just me and Inez, if we would have had about 5 revolutionaries elected to the city council? Man, that's $5 million a year that every council member gets to run the office. Oh man. Anyway.
That's why Ross Baraka in Newark was such a disappointment, because
Yes.
Ross came up from the grassroots struggling. I used to go speak for him with his organization when he was on the streets. But when he got elected, he could have been like Humpty Dumpty. He could have tore that whole edifice of police state down. He could have created by fiat community control of public safety. The police unions opposed that, but Ross became a professional politician. He became a career politician. And we need to understand those brothers and sisters we put into office, they shouldn't be concerned about getting reelected. They should be concerned about restructuring the system where they're at while they're there. And so if they get kicked out of office, it would be practically impossible to put it back together the way it was before. And that's what we have to understand. We need to elect people like Charles and activists that come from amongst us. We need to put them in positions to tear down edifice of electoral machinations that oppressed us, rather than decide to become a career.
Our little East New York community is not gentrified. Harlem is, Bed-Stuy is, Crown Heights is, all of those surrounding communities that had neo-colonial Black puppets are gentrified. And then they say, we lost to DSA because the gentrifiers came in. You let them in. I sat next to you and you passed housing policies that let the gentrifiers in. Wasn't no white people that let them in, because there's no white politicians in Bed-Stuy. The Blacks let them in. I saw the project on the floor. I said, hey man, don't vote for that one. It's 20% affordable, 80% market. You're gonna be gentrified. Well, at least we got some jobs and we got some affordable housing. And then they get gentrified and lose their seats. Hakeem Jeffries was in the 57th Assembly District with Letitia James. His man lost to DSA because when Hakeem was in, it was 72% Black. But time he left, it was 31% Black. And he and Tish, they did that. And then said, oh, look at all them white people coming into the community. Those are gentrifiers. You let them in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like it was a surprise or something. Before we go, I want to ask one final question of both of y'all. Again, there'll be a show on Sunday at 7 p.m. for the viewers. Professor Griffin and I will be talking about, some of your white friends. We'll talk about these lynchings. We're gonna go a little deeper with the whole Nolan situation. And I just want to ask you all, because of the fact that from a safety measure, I know back in the day, we all can recall, our elders telling us how to move and how to maneuver, especially in the South, so on and so forth. You needed to know, how to move around, so on and so forth. We know that whenever a lion moves alone, hyenas will make an attempt to jump on that one lion. You know what I mean? What is your words for, because of the fact that, again, and we will be focusing more on some of these unfortunate victims. And I know, as Dhoruba would say, revolutionaries never victim, but we know that most of the folks who are victimized aren't revolutionaries. So I would like to ask you all, for safety precautions and advice you have for parents and also young folks and others, in preventing some of these lynchings, uh, white supremacist murders, murders by police, so on and so forth. What advice would you all give to our people at this point?
Well, I got a simple. My simple advice is that those people in our community, there are forces in our community that are ready for armed resistance. They're psychologically, emotionally prepared to do what many of us are afraid to do or feel intimidated from doing. And these are the so-called street niggas, the street sets. These are the brothers on the streets. They have no politics. Their ideal is their whole struggle is to achieve that bag, is to get that bag by any means necessary. They have no politics. And if we go back to the history, if we look at the rise of the Chinese Communist Party and the movement in China that Mao Zedong led, you would see that when he was repressed in the cities, he moved to the countryside in order to organize the resistance against the colonizers and against the enemies of working people. And what he found in the rural areas, that there were people who were prepared to fight against the landlords. The landlords were oppressing them and stealing their labor and stealing their crops. So he organized amongst the most oppressive and segment in society. And by 1949, he marched into Peking, and the Chinese Communist Party has been there ever since. So we need to understand that those most oppressed people in our community are the brothers and sisters that are sleeping on the streets, the brothers and sisters on the streets who are hustling from day to day. You understand? Who understand who the enemy is. They have to be politicized and organized in order to form the type of front that we need to protect the Black community. And it's very important that we understand how to do that. And I think one of the ways that we can do that is we have to get our people to train out to become their first responders. We have to train to become our first responders in catastrophes like Katrina. We have professional firefighters that are Black. We have professional installers of electrical systems who know the systems in the cities, who know the electrical power grid in the cities, who repair it every day. They need to train our people on how we can become self-sustainable in case the water gets cut off. Okay, how do we get water to our people? If the electricity goes down tomorrow, how do we power our community? These are issues of survival. Resistance is about survival. Resistance is not just about trying to be slick or trying to be tough or trying to talk shit. It's about the survival of our community and our people. And we realize in order for us to survive, the enemy of African people have to understand they have to leave us alone, or there's a consequence that they cannot afford. And that means everybody be on board in this resistance.
I couldn't agree with that more. And one of the things, first of all, I would suggest that there be no Black person out there not a part of some organization, some movement. Don't be out there by yourself. That's number one. Number two, we got to get back to community patrols of our neighborhoods. We were able to secure millions of dollars from Man Up Inc. under the leadership of Andre Mitchell. Matter of fact, Dhoruba, when you came, remember took you to the center we had. We all our brothers and sisters in there. They patrol East New York. So, and they really looking at community crime, but also can't nobody else come in there and do nothing either. So the crime went down. But I think if we have, once again, political power, we cannot be powerless and protect ourselves. We got to have political and economic power to deal with the social structure, whether it's a security firm, whether it's a community patrol, that can be funded with our tax-paying dollars. We're not begging nobody for nothing. If I got to pay you some taxes, then I want some of that money to go to a security organization in my neighborhood, like Man Up Inc. and like some other groups that I know are funded. The Nation of Islam, FOI, the Fruit of Islam, they even came in to a project development in my neighborhood, and the violence went down to nothing. And then when they found it was the Nation, they defunded the program and the violence shot back up. When the
No
brother,
taxation without representation. That's
exactly.
what these records say.
Same thing.
So we shouldn't pay that. We ain't
No.
being represented.
The same
Gerrymandering us
thing
out.
with the Crips and the Bloods and the Latin Kings. I was training the Latin Kings and some of the Crips and Bloods. They had a shooting in my neighborhood. Some Latin Kings were shot by Bloods. King Tone, who I was working with, came into my neighborhood with 1,000 Latin Kings, went to the family of the Bloods, because you know how they take revenge. They're gonna get your family, they're gonna do something in retaliation. He brought those two brothers on the stage with their wounds and said, not in this district. There'll be no retaliation. But brothers, y'all got to stop, because we respect Brother Barron, and we're not gonna do that in this neighborhood. Do you know, about a month later, they arrested King Tone and put him back in prison, and they went back to the streets and back to the battling. When we had them politicized, as Dhoruba was saying, we had them politicized. So that's the kind of stuff I think we got to do.
Absolutely.
Appreciate you, brothers. I want to also add on that for women and children in particular, and brothers as well, moving alone these days is not the right way to go. You know what I'm saying?
No.
Moving in the dark, all the cowards come out. Houdini had a song called "The Freaks Come Out at Night." We say these cowards come out at night because they move in the dark. Moving along in these different rural areas in the city as well. When we talk about terrorism, it's not just the usual, we talk about the Klan and all of that. The Klan got badges. The Klan got gavels. You understand what I'm saying? Some of these lynchings, don't get it twisted. It's not just everyday white folks that's stringing, quote unquote, stringing a nigga up. You know what I'm saying? A lot of these cases, you're finding that, it's ruled a suicide before anything even happens. We were working on the case of Kendrick Johnson, the brother who was rolled up in the mat in Valdosta, Georgia. Over about 2013, he was killed. And one of the things I can remember, the sheriff, before there was even an autopsy report, he said it was an accidental death. So you had a sheriff playing a role of a coroner. You understand what I'm saying? And to you all's point, what happens is not only do they victimize you, but then they'll turn around and charge you. So the Kendrick Johnson family is paying restitution to the folks that they accused of murdering their son. In this situation right now with Nolan Wells, you have these racist ass crackers threatening the family of his family, threatening their job, threatening, sending things to their home, so on and so forth, demanding a cease and desist and all of this type of nonsense, while victims are simply looking for what would be called justice. But in the words of George Jackson, since we're here today and it is Black August, George Jackson said that he demanded reparations in blood. And that's the part that our people don't want to talk about, because of the fact that even white folks talked about an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But when it comes to their turn, they ain't got no eyes. You know what I'm saying? And we ain't got nothing to do with it. I would say I'm going to invite you brothers back, but you already at home, so ain't no need for me to invite your ass back. I appreciate what y'all brought to the table today. And some of y'all might be like, man, he joking with those elders. These brothers give me hell. I just want y'all to know that. I just want, for anybody to think they are victims, don't get it twisted. But definitely appreciate the last minute joint. And till next time, stay on the right side of the barricades, and we will see y'all soon.
Yes, study history and study recent history. It's very, very important to see where we are at in this historical moment. And therefore, what some of us have to do, everybody can't do everything, but whatever you can do, whatever contribution you can make, like Charles said, join the organization and make that contribution.
Look at that.
Sure
Remember, the struggle may be long, but our victory is certain. We're going to win, y'all.
No doubt. No doubt. Y'all be safe. Support Black Power Media. We'll talk to y'all soon. Peace.
Peace.
Peace.